Got to go back to the start of my notes. Hey everyone, my name is Luke, and I truly am a grateful believer in Christ. We say that each weekend. For me, I believe that, and I feel that every day. I'm going to be reading a lot off my notes just so that I can stay on track for the most part, and so that I can make a lot of sense. But I honestly don't know if I'll go over time or under time. Hopefully Mary Beth will shoot me off the stage if I get up to the 25-minute mark. Hi, Tim. So I'm a grateful believer in Christ, and I've struggled a lot in my lifetime. I put on the website there just some of the few things that I've struggled with initially, but I struggled most of my life from childhood trauma, and then anger, alcohol, and sexual addiction, and then abuse. So up until 2 years ago, I believed, for the most part, that I was a good person. I believed that I had a normal marriage, facing normal challenges as any other couple, and that we were also parents to a 2-year-old. Though the first few years did have their challenges, in 2019, it seemed like our family was having some good breakthrough. I was serving the church on the worship team, yet I felt like walking away from my faith in God. Now, to give you a bit of a background, I grew up in a Christian home with 3 older siblings, and with me being the youngest by 10 years. I did spend a lot of my childhood feeling like I was an only child, meaning I probably got more spoiled than I should have been. Now, my walk of faith began when I was 4 years old. My sister introduced me to Jesus, heaven, hell one night. I didn't really know everything at that point in time, but I do believe that that's when God came into my life. And around the same time, at that age, I believe that's also when spiritual warfare began, looking back. Even though I grew up with a loving Christian family, yes, I know all parents aren't perfect, but I struggled with much of my early life, especially those early years, with not feeling loved. And I feel like that was part of the spiritual attack as well. I remember just feeling like I wanted to escape from a young age. At school, I struggled academically. I was diagnosed at a young age with ADHD. Means I get distracted and get off point a lot. I struggled socially as well. Though my school years, through my school years, I was bullied a fair bit. Some years worse than others. This caused me to feel like I didn't have a place really in the world. I didn't feel loved at home, even though I was being loved by my parents, and I didn't feel accepted at school. A big part of my childhood trauma also started when I was sexually abused by a neighborhood kid in elementary school. Now, it happened only one time, but that opened up a world of curiosity and perversion. I then ended up doing that to another kid not long after. Thankfully, that kid told his parents, then told my parents, and we had the awkward conversation about what happened, why it happened, and what happened to me. I'd like to say that was the only trauma that I'd received, and that was it, but it went on further. Now, I remember at that time feeling a lot of great feelings of guilt and shame. I also recognized that I struggled with the need to feel loved at a young age, also having attachment, and just trying to find someone to attach onto, and just hoping one day I'd be able to have a family of my own, and they would love me for the love that I wasn't receiving at that time. And so I know now the 5 love languages, how we can love our spouses, family, and people around us with love languages by pouring into them with their whatever love language they receive. But this set the stage for me because I wasn't feeling I was receiving love at home, so I started looking for it elsewhere. And come middle school, so I was struggling at home, struggling at school, but all of a sudden there was one person that was a family friend that started to pour into me. They were a family friend, now become youth pastor at the church. They began to show me ways of love that I received love. He would verbally encourage me, he would give me hugs and high fives, and it felt great. I felt special. Someone noticed me, someone cared about me. I believe someone loved me. Unfortunately, that love was abused. I remember driving with my mom one time, and this was before the abuse happened with this person, and I remember her warning me, be careful when you go hang with other boys at sleepovers and stuff like that. They might try to do stuff to you. And I remember so confidently saying, no way is anyone going to do that to me. If they do that to me, I'm going to fill in the blank. No one's going to do that to me. I remember that. I remember that conversation. I remember the first night I was abused. So many details are very vivid to me about that today. But just the things that I want to share is just the feelings of feeling trapped, scared, ashamed, angry. why, like, I wanted to run away from it in the moment, but also at the same time couldn't, and just felt like deer frozen in the headlights. I blocked out much of the months following that, and I just remember trying to avoid or escape the situations. But I remember beginning to resent the receiving love in the ways that I received love. So I was hungry for love, yet I was triggered, nauseated, and angered when I received it. Even something as simple as receiving a hug at church would cause me to feel so uncomfortable and so much anger and frustration. I began being disconnected from my emotions. Now, eventually someone tipped off the church and that something was going on. There was investigations that happened, but because of legal reasons, they couldn't talk about this. But they had a good idea who was affected, so they interviewed all the boys, and every one of the kids that was interviewed denied having had that experience, including myself. Whether it was fear of hurting this person who was pouring into me despite, all the bad that had happened. I'm not really sure why I didn't at such a young age, but I'm sure there's a lot of feelings back in that moment. But I ended up having to go in front of investigation cameras, mirrored rooms, and share or talk about what didn't happen because I denied it. And so he ended up being cleared, and him and his wife, the person who abused me, ended up fleeing the country, moved somewhere else. And it was difficult afterwards because this was a secret that I was holding within, and anger started to build up inside me. I wasn't able to talk about it, and so kids at youth were talking about how they missed him, yet I had such a deep anger and hurt inside me anytime that it got brought up. School got worse, bullying got physically worse, and I just realized at a young age that I had to defend myself and that there was no one else going to defend me and protect me. It was just me, and teachers weren't there, it was just myself. But just feeling trapped in so many different situations. Things at home escalated. I ended up stealing from stores, stealing from the church. The church gave grace and gave me only volunteer hours to make amends. And then a week later, I ended up getting arrested for stealing again. And so there's so much confusion. My parents were wondering, okay, what's going on? And my mom's very blunt, and she said, you're either on drugs or you're being abused. And I broke down and told them. And so then I was all the way back to the beginning of going in front of these interviews and explaining in detail what happened this time, because I didn't do it the first time. There was strong anger and confusion, and to be honest, there was a lot of questions and confusion around sexual orientation. What was I? If he did this to me and I felt this, what does this make me? But I couldn't talk about this because I didn't know what to feel about it, what the church think about it, what my parents think. And it just made me mad because this is another thing that I couldn't talk about, because the investigation going on with the sexual abuse, I couldn't talk about that because it could compromise the investigation. So couldn't talk about the abuse or the confusion. And so it started to build the foundation of my belief that if people really knew who I was, they wouldn't accept me, they wouldn't be friends with me, they wouldn't talk to me, they wouldn't love me. Tensions escalated with my parents, and I ended up, things got more physical. I ended up punching my dad. There's just a lot of frustration. I was on antidepressants, and I remember when all these things were going on, I just felt so numb, so disconnected. And I wrote down after I punched my dad, I felt no emotion, no empathy, no compassion, no remorse. And it was that incident that kind of led me into foster care. I was in and out of foster care for a fair while. I ended up having a really good foster home near the end of it. Things were going well, but they thought I was doing so well, so they sent me back to my parents. And it wasn't a fault of my parents, but I ended up getting involved with the wrong people and exposed to alcohol at a young age. So I really liked alcohol, but I was limited by money for the first little while when I was back home. My sister got me joining the military around the same time, grade 11 or so. All of a sudden that gave me good discipline, a lot of good work values, but it also gave me money with no bills to spend it on. And so in grade 12, I ended up developing an alcohol addiction. And really, I've heard a lot that it happens from the first sip, and it really was that way for myself from the first sip. Because I was able to disconnect, I didn't have to feel the feelings, felt confident, just covered up everything that I was experiencing. So I was drinking during school. My locker filled up with bottles. I was drinking after school, skipping school for drinking. And I loved it. I ended up, I skimmed by grade 11, but grade 12 I ended up failing. And you would think that would be a sobering experience, finding out, after the prom that you failed high school and had to go back. But it wasn't. Another thing that happened, I just missed a quick point. And so during these times, I ended up, in high school, I ended up getting drunk so much to the point that I would black out. And in high school, I ended up getting myself in a position where I drank so much I blacked out. Where I was in and out, and I ended up getting taken advantage by male friends. And it's so frustrating because I believed that if this would have happened to me again, that, I wouldn't let it happen. But yet here I was, and I was feeling like it was my fault because I didn't say anything. So to make up for the same-sex thoughts that were happening in my head at the time, I tried to push back the other way. I was entrenched in a pornography addiction, pursuing hard after girls, and becoming extremely manipulative. I believed that I wanted to be loved, and I believed that way was by sex. And so I ended up failing school, but I went back and finished the grade 12 year. Still didn't straighten me out. In 2011, I continued having a problem with drinking, and I ended up crashing my truck into a pole while impaired and texting and driving. Because I was celebrating with a buddy who was going on a deployment. I was still in the military. I began to work full-time for the military after high school, which also didn't help the habit. Just after high school, though, I got into a serious relationship, and I thought that was the greatest thing. I felt loved, but it became very unhealthy, and it definitely wasn't godly. And looking back, I can see how there's many ways that it become verbally and emotionally abusive in the relationship, both ways. I was frustrated in the relationship, wanted to leave it. I felt some, conviction that it wasn't a Christian relationship. I was still going to church every Sunday, still being a Christian. And even though I was frustrated with the relationship, wanted to leave it, I was happy about what I was getting, receiving love and other things. And even though I didn't like the relationship totally, I was also afraid of losing it. And so my solution to that was to see multiple people while going the course of the relationship, and that didn't end up going well. I ended up breaking the relationship off, and I was just in a dark spot for a fair while. But God brought some Christian friends around in 2012, and it was great. Like, I ended up meeting a Christian girl, and the first Christian girl that showed interest to me, I ended up getting engaged to her in 3 months, but it didn't last. Thankfully, it just wouldn't have been good for either of us. In 2014, my world, 2014 was a big point in my time. I was on track to be in the Air Force and flying in planes, and it was great. And I won't get into the whole part of that, but God just wrecked my world, and I ended up getting called into the military full time to go to Bible school, and that's a whole other testimony in itself. But during that time, one of the songs I asked Melanie to play was, I don't know where she is, it was Oceans Melody. And that song was so powerful for me that summer, because God was calling me out of something I knew and calling me to trust Him to walk into this. And so I experienced some surrender that summer, ended up going to Bible school, but still wasn't fully surrendered. Met an amazing girl there on move-in day, but still struggled with huge insecurity. And I promised God that I wouldn't run into any relationship again. So I waited 3 months before I ended up dating this girl. And things were pretty great, I felt, and there's some bumps, but it wasn't like any of my previous relationships. We ended up getting engaged fairly quickly as well, 6 months later. I was in Bible school, I wasn't fully surrendered, I was still struggling with porn, and couldn't talk about it because I was becoming a pastor. I couldn't talk about struggling with porn. Pastors don't do that. And I thought that marriage also would fix my struggle with porn, and it didn't. My manipulative behaviors continued into my marriage, and even on it just got worse. Day one of the honeymoon, just how it affected the relationship on my side, what I was doing. I was very pushy in the relationships, back in the relationships high school as well as in my marriage, in a lot of ways, and I would be whiny and everything else, and just trying to get my way, anything to do to get my way without necessarily forcing it, but just without physically forcing it, but trying to get what I want to receive. Financial stress began to set in while I was going to Bible school, attending Bible school, married, and just things weren't working out. And so instead of trusting in God, I tried to figure it out myself. 2016, we got pregnant, or my wife was pregnant, and so that was exciting, but also stressful because that doesn't help finances. So I ended up taking a job in Nova Scotia during the summer without talking to my wife about it, and spent the weeks in Nova Scotia, weekends with her. Meanwhile, she didn't have a family because she wasn't from around here. And it was Mike did his testimony on if onlys. If only I did stuff different. That's like one of my biggest if onlys. If only I did that different, maybe things would be different. But so I worked there during the summer, and it was good money, but still not trusting on God. It was tons of money, and it didn't go as far. And I didn't tell her about finances. She never knew what was fully going on. Coming back that summer to school, I fell into a deep depression. Madison was on the way. Anxiety came over me. I was working 3 jobs, new husband, soon to be new father, because this all happened within the first year of being married. And it felt like I was failing at everything. I didn't write the big chunk here because I wanted to go off script for it. But in 2017, after all that stress was happening in my life began to fall apart. I failed at a Bible college and ended up coming back here to Fredericton. I tried to figure things out, and I'd have a job for a little bit, and I ended up being out of work for 3 months. And my wife and I we weren't even able to afford milk for Madison at the time, back fall 2017. And I remember it was like one of the darkest points in my life. I say the darkest, but the darkest to come. But I was like, God, like what's happening? Like I went to Bible school, all this stuff, but I was still like not fully surrendered, and just living in the denial that I was in. But like I said at the start of my testimony, things started to get better from there. I got a good contract because it was my own doing, not God's, and things slowly started to progress. We found a church that we liked, and I was able to serve in it. And so in 2019, when I thought things were going good, and she got a full-time job, finally we got Madison in daycare, she said that she wanted separation. And I realized that there's things I need to work on. I wasn't completely naive, but I could be more organized, financially transparent, better overall husband. But I was taken back when she said she wanted to leave me for the last 2 years of our marriage, over half our married time. And so that month I tried to fix things in my own strength, wasn't able to. And I was losing all hope, and I essentially said to her, driving one day, she was like, I want you out this week. And I remember driving across the Princess Margaret Bridge, just wrecked, like trying to like she wasn't saying anything. I was like, swear at me, to say something to me, get mad at me, just talk to me. And she was done. And so I remember trying to do my best not to fall apart this part, but I remember driving across the Princess Margaret Bridge and talking to our 2-year-old, and she probably had no idea what was going on. But I was telling her, I was like, I don't know. I was like, Madison, I don't know when I'm going to see you again. I didn't know how true those words would be. So that night, like I said to her, I was like, Daddy has to go away for a while. Don't know when I'm going to see you again. That night I packed. I was planning to move out the next day. Planning to move out the next morning. And I made some comments because I was I said to my wife, I was like, what's the point of living if I don't know my wife? What's the point of living if I don't know my family? And so it's kind of like suicidal comments essentially is what it was. Anyways, 11 p.m. that night, my wife was at work. Police ended up coming to the house, and they served me with what's called an emergency intervention order. I had no idea what that was. But what it meant is I wasn't able to talk to my wife for 30 days to 6 months, couldn't talk to my daughter, lost my house, had 5 minutes to gather all what I could and leave the vehicle, and I had to leave. I couldn't go to my church anymore, and all of a sudden I felt like I was blindsided in a lot of ways. It was honestly such a confusing time. I didn't know what had got myself to that point, and it was a dark weekend that was just driving a bus, the person that I, like my best friend, person that I thought that I was loving, but really wasn't loving in a lot of ways, that was just cut off. And I believe that it was God's sovereign timing for that to happen. If I had moved it the next day, I would have blamed it on my wife and would have, just dealt with it on my own. But I was forced to be in a spot that I could either get angry and, do bad things about it, or I could get angry and get help. And it wasn't right away. So I ended up there's 2 times in my life that I contemplated suicide. Once was around the time of the abuse, and it was that weekend as well. But God's hand of protection was just over that situation. And, he provided the right people that were able to be there around to support me in that time. God brought me through. God surrounded me with support. And that Monday, I remember I had no place to stay except for there's a place on base that I had this little house, which was nice. But I broke down before the Lord that night, Labor Day, Monday, 2019. I was like, God, my life is just like a mess. It's in pieces. God, if you're able to do anything with the mess that I have here, if you can forgive me for how I've wasted and squandered the things with my family, haven't treated them right, I'm all yours. I'm all yours. And so the next part, try to condense it down. But the last 2 years, there's been so much healing. One of the first things that I did in this time was I had to ask for help. I could no longer try to hide my things. I had to, like our steps talk about, I had to openly examine my faults and to share it with someone I trust. And so I poured everything out. And one of the first things that I received from that was just the peace of God that came to me. The peace of God, the anger that I had for 13 years was gone. I felt that I had an anger problem, so I went to look at anger management, and there wasn't an anger management course available, but there's a partner abuse program, and I was like, that's not for me. That's not me. That's not going to help me, but it was the only thing available. I ended up plugging into that. I ended up, there's just every need that I had in that time. I'm going to go off script for the last bit so I can condense down. Every need that I've had in the last 2 years, God's met. Everything that I've struggled with, there's this mountain in front of me. God's cleared that out of the way. I wasn't able to see my daughter for 6 months, but I was like, God, I trust you. This situation is painful. This doesn't feel like the peace that surpasses all understanding, but I had that peace. Even though there was a storm all around me, God was just there in that storm, just caused my soul to rest. And I remember different points of time when I was struggling with trying to get Madison back into my life and just fighting in all the right ways. I couldn't fight and say, I had to come to that admitting spot of admitting that I had become abusive, admitting that I was powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong thing, that my life was unmanageable. And so when I was able to do that, I was able to start going forward. When I believed that God existed and that I mattered to him, he gave me that power to recover. He started working with different things. He'll show you maybe a bunch of things all at once, but he was just working on one thing at a time. And I'd be worried about next month or this or that. And he says, Luke, I'm not giving you the strength for next month. I'm giving you the strength for today. And so I consciously committed to everything that he brought forward to me. I surrounded myself with mentors and sponsors. And I remember I heard about Celebrate Recovery, and 5 years before, I went with my wife to one in King's Church, and I was like, this is great for other people, but I don't need this. I'm in Bible school. I don't need this. And I remember how much I wanted to attend, and Dale, I called the church, and Pastor Dale said, well, we already started Life Sealing Choices. Maybe you should get involved in January. I was like, I need this now. I need to get in on this. And I'm so thankful that I got into Celebrate Recovery. Because it's provided a way to be able to have accountability. It's provided a way to have support, people that I'm able to share to. And the same hope that God's given me in this time with the last 2 years and everything, how I've experienced healing, I want to share that with other people. There's this hope that God's given me now. There's this joy that I've never experienced before this point. And it's contagious. It's contagious. Just see if there's anything else, but I think that's pretty well it. yeah, anything that God's given me, or any of the challenges that Satan's put in front of me, I've just been blown away of just how God's cleared each and every out of the way. And so, like, each day is still a struggle, but I'm so thankful for where I'm at. I still struggle each day, but I struggle with God's strength on my side, and with Him, I have the power to recover. So I think that's everything. Thanks so much, guys.